evidence you have to work with for constructing an accurate forensic image of a Bigfoot.
Well, let me explain a couple of things here. That when Dave contacted me and asked me to interview some people, he never told me the circumstances. You know, in fact, he left the room and let the witness came in and allowed me to just interview them and the circumstances, and he might have told me the witness's name or the victim. From that point on, I did my interview, and my interviews are done as a forensic artist rather than an illustrator, and so my drawings are done in the presence of my witness. When the witness leaves, I don't touch anything else. I don't change anything. I leave it just the way it is. And I do portraits, and they take a long time. But my drawings are done in about 2 hours. That includes an interview, and then the actual drawing, and then the coloring. And so we talk about the body structure, you know, of how powerful they are, and barrel-chested, or some of them were thin. We determine, are we drawing a male or a female, you know, and what age do you think they are? And so we go through a great deal of dialogue, and I've even done some drawings of the backs, just to see the back, to see how the hair is on it and how it moves, and when they were talking about it running or moving away, and the shoulders, the massive shoulders and arms and hands. And so we did a whole series of drawings of profiles, full face, just the face, full body, frontals, the back, the sides. So we wanted to give an idea of what we were seeing from different angles to determine the type of hair they had, a hair that was almost like a cape as it came across the back. I've never seen any bones. I don't know anything about their bone structure. I've just my drawings are based on witness description drawings. And,
all right. Very good. I like that, and I just wanted to make sure that I understood all of that. David, tell me, as a police investigator, formerly a police investigator, what is it that then what unique perspective did you have as somebody who was involved with police investigations that allowed you to that you think makes it special as you're investigating these Bigfoot sightings? What is it that you find yourself attuned to that others might not be?
Well, I was very fortunate to work around other forensic artists similar to Harvey in Northern California. And Harvey's not going to say this, but I'll say this on his behalf, that he's drawn sketches with the aid of victim and witnesses of suspects in crime, and they're later apprehended. And it would look like the suspect was sitting in the room when Harvey drew the picture. That's how accurate this man is. Okay. And that's one of the reasons why we engaged him to do the work. I had an understanding after years of working with forensic artists at the level of Harvey that how valuable this is. And there's been sort of a cloud over the entire Bigfoot research area, and there are people who think it looks apish, and there's people who think it looks more human. Well, let's get to the bottom of that so we can understand what we're researching. And there's a story that emanated out of a Texas Bigfoot conference that Harvey and I were at, and Harvey had some of his artwork laying on a table, and an older teenager came into the room with his mom and was looking at the desk, and he looked at Harvey's art, and literally he yelled out loud, "Mom, come over here, this guy's got it right." And the way the story went is he was working with another group who used an artist, and this artist continually tried to draw a facial feature of an ape. And this kid said he sent the artwork back and forth through fax 5 times, and the person could not get it right. Harvey sits down in a room, finishes the drawing in 2 hours, draws exactly what the witness says, and we have yet to draw anything close to an ape.
Well, I love that. And so is that where it ends then? You're sort of the policeman's acumen?
Absolutely not. We have 3 or 4 big projects going on right now. One of them that's gone on for 2 years is a DNA study of Bigfoot hair. It's a very complex issue. The morphology of the hair of a Bigfoot is different than anything else in the world. And we've had hair and fiber experts in law enforcement look at it and say it's nothing like a human, but it mimics other primate hair, but it's not like any other primate. And whereas a human hair has a medulla or a core that has our DNA in it, Bigfoot hair is so fragmented at the medulla that you can't get DNA from the medulla. You need to find a hair that has a follicle, and in Bigfoot research, that's unusual to find. For some reason, when the hair falls out, it just falls out. Maybe 1%, maybe 2% of all the hairs out there have a follicle that contains DNA. And in our research, going back to a time when DNA first started to be researched, every one of these comes back as human. And then the pessimists say, well, it's contamination that's causing this human return on the DNA. Well, after a while, you got to say, well, somebody's had to have had this right somewhere along the line, and it has to be somewhat close.
Right.
Well, we're within 2 or 3, maybe 4 months of finishing our project, and as I stated in Tribal Bigfoot, I listed some of the lab reports, and we have very, very unusual returns.
We'll talk about that, because I just got an email from a guy before the show started. He said, yeah, Bigfoot, Schmigfoot. He said, there's no hard evidence. If there's any hard evidence, produce it now. And it seems to me, I mean, I've been in conversations with Dr. Jeff Meldrum for years, and there is evidence. How hard one wants to define it, I think, depends perhaps on how high you want to keep raising the bar. But what do you think is the hardest evidence you have for the proof of the existence of Bigfoot?
I think there's no doubt it's got to be the hair. And the reason I say that is that we have multiple samples from multiple locations, and the hair has a consistency to it. And the hair and fiber analysts all say, hey, this is a hair. This isn't a synthetic hair. This isn't a man-made hair. This is a hair. It mimics primate hair, but it's like no other primate in the world. And there is some level of DNA in it, and we have had some returns. Now, as accurate as we are going to be, we're not going to go out with the first returns we have. We've gone over this time after time after time, 24 months now. We're being very, very cautious. But I will say without a doubt that DNA and the morphology of the hair that we've accumulated is an absolute best evidence.
How soon before you think you have conclusive, peer-reviewed, university-level genetic proof that is undeniable even by the biggest skeptics?
And there's one of the points. Rather than come out with those first results, which can't be duplicated, we're waiting so it can be duplicated. We are using people at the level you just explained. They're very cautious. They're very accurate. If people come back and second-guess the results, we're inviting people to come back at the time that we release this to look at it, look at the results. And there won't be any mistake in this. It's a very cumbersome, long-term process. It takes somebody who really has an interest in this to make it work, and luckily we found those people.
Okay, and those people are?
Well, we've said it in the past. I'm not going to say it again because what happens is that you have people calling in and saying, oh, yeah, we're from North America Bigfoot Search. We need some help on understanding these returns again. And at the time that we release it, obviously the lab, the PhDs, et cetera, that are all involved are going to come forward and they'll talk about it. But right now we're not going to say who they are. Okay, fair enough. Well, you don't mind me, a girl's got to try, I'd say. Yes. So you don't mind me asking. No. How has... I mean, the search that you have been going on, a well-funded search, there's been, I wouldn't say it, I don't want to get too much into the tit for tat for this, but I was curious as I was doing research for tonight's show. There's some people that are going back and forth, and they actually sound kind of jealous a little bit that you are so well-funded with the North American Bigfoot search. You continue to draw your funding for all of this scientific exploration from Silicon Valley? Yes.
and this is privately funded in terms of, just the interest of some people who are well-funded themselves.
Correct.
Okay. Well, and there's nothing to be ashamed of with that. But there are, I think there's some other people out there that look at that and they go, well, do they really have what they say they are, or are they just doing this just to keep the money flowing?
Well, as I've said it all along, I haven't really made any statements that we can't back up. In Tribal Bigfoot, I've listed two lab reports, and they're very unique. They haven't been replicated by anybody else, and if they have been, the people haven't stepped forward and said, yeah, we have these same returns. We utilized Harvey throughout the U.S. on multiple levels to understand if this is a consistent look across the U.S. It is. We've interviewed people throughout the U.S. on the behavioral issues, and you could read about a lot of that on the website. So I don't think we've made any claims that we haven't stood up and stood behind. I think that what Harvey's done and what we've done at the DNA level, at the forensics level, and at the behavioral and associations level, I think it all speaks for itself by some of the justified work that we've also put up regarding language, DNA, behavior, et cetera.
Okay. Well, I'm all for it. I mean, like millions of other people out there, I just want this to get settled. I believe that these creatures either exist or they don't. And my feeling has been all this time that they do. But either way, I just want there to be the scientific proof so we can move forward with what that next level is. Now, once we've established, once you've got DNA, once you are able to, to prove through those hair samples that this is without a doubt a type of hominid, a cousin, perhaps a distant cousin to humans, but a legitimate species, not a cryptozoological animal anymore. Then what, David or Harvey? Then what? Then what do we do?
Well, I will say that there's a series of researchers in this world regarding Bigfoot, Sasquatch, hairy man, that sit on the post that say, hey, this is an ape, this is Gigantopithecus.
Right.
I think you're going to see those people disappear because their entire last 40 years of research is centered around that. And they've publicly come out and stated that we're wrong, this isn't what it is, this isn't what we're researching. And I'm not going to say that to them because if the people have a paradigm shift on this issue, and you think in the U.S. we have Asians, Africans, Indians, we have some people from Amazon tribes, you have the Nordics. Let's think about the variance in appearance of those different genetics.
Right.
And they're huge.
Right.
So if we say that Bigfoot on that genetic tree is much closer to human than it is to ape or gorilla, then why wouldn't the differences in genetics apply to them as much as it applies to humans? So the differences in physical appearance, the differences in stature, the amount of hair. You talked about the hair coloring just briefly, and I'll go to that right now and say that one of the things that we've surmised from this is that we have never drawn a golden-colored or blonde Bigfoot that was large and thick and mature in stature. They're all small-framed, thin, and in similar ways to a young teenager that's still filling out as they get older. So maybe as a human, we have a towhead or a kid that's growing and changing hair color as they get older.
Right.
Possibly.
Yeah, my kids were almost white blonde for years, and now they're slowly moving into brunette.
There you go. And then as you get older, you get gray, and Harvey and I have interviewed individuals that talk about seeing an older, frail-looking Bigfoot that was gray.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Harvey, your thought? What's next? Once this DNA evidence is made available, once it's been peer reviewed, once the most skeptical scientist, biologist, zoologist, anthropologist, whatever, is satisfied that this is real, then what?
Well, I think that at some point the states, tribes, the U.S. government, someone could step in and make some kind of declaration, that this has to be
of human rights.
it has to be preserved in some way, protected, until we know more about it. I just think that's the next step. And you talk about hair. Let me revert back just a second. If you're an outdoorsman, you know that in the summer, deer are that tawny color, and then as it starts to get into fall and winter, they get darker. So the colors change. So I don't have all the answers on this, but I know that maybe that could be part of it too. Maybe with the season they might change, and if they live in a certain area, maybe they have a just like animals do. They adapt.
Sure. They adapt to the season.
Yeah.
David or Harvey, are you proposing that once the DNA comes back that says that there is no doubt that this species exists, should we ever attempt to capture one? And if we declare that they have human rights, how can we?
Well, let's get to the point where we have the DNA and it can be replicated, so it's acknowledged by science.
Right.
Hopefully a couple of major universities are going to come forward. Some people that have an enlightening mind can step forward and say, okay, this needs to be studied at length. Let's understand the historical perspective. Let's see where we can go with this, number one.
Right.
And if they have those genetics that are so close to human, as I've told people when I was on George's show last time, that I don't think you should be going out and hunting these things.
Right.
Because if that genetics comes back as it's very, very close to human, it could be in a lot of trouble. So I think you have a point there about capturing one. And
but once we've made a declaration of human rights protections, then we effectively prevent us from ever being able to do anything to have another contact other than totally voluntary. If we're talking about an animal, then you can still declare that to be, say, a protected species, and then you could still capture one theoretically without violating its human rights. I'm really throwing that out just to say this is where we stand, kind of at the crossroads of that evidence that you present. I've got a couple of the questions I want to get to, too, coming up next hour, but this is that opportunity where you can come in, and everybody's been very patient. They heard Kathy Strain talking about some of the Native American stories about Bigfoot, about hairy men, about Sasquatch. We didn't take any questions with her, but we will with with Harvey and David coming up in just a second. We'll get to your questions. We'll get to your comments. If you're part of a Native American tradition that talks about Bigfoot, I would like to hear more about that too. Or if you want to reflect on exactly what you think we ought to do next, what should we be prepared to do? And then a couple more of the stories of the Native Americans as collected by David and Harvey next on Coast to Coast. This is Ian Punnett. I have big love for Bigfoot. I'm sure many people out there do, hoping that we'll be making contact in a big way sometime soon. So we'll get to your questions and comments for Harvey Pratt and David Paulides, both of whom have experience with the North American Bigfoot search and in their own way with the Native American traditions too. But back to the question about their backgrounds as police investigators. Anytime that there are serial experiences, I don't mean like a killer, but I mean where many witnesses are reporting similar things spread out over a geographical distance and time, an investigator, I would think, would look for similarities in the stories to try to find out whether or not it could be the same person, the same suspect, so to speak, involved in all of these incidences. So, as investigators, what did Harvey and David find as they were investigating these different reports of Bigfoot that would tie them all together? What are the similar characteristics of these reports? We'll explore that along with your questions and comments next on Coast to Coast. This is Ian Punnett. All right, let's get to west and east of the Rockies and the first-time caller line and the wild card lines as we're lining them up right now in just a second. But Harvey Pratt and David Politis, both of whom have a law enforcement background as part of their investigations into Bigfoot. Let me ask you all, I kind of threw out this idea that you were, as police investigators, you would look for similarities in the ways in which these reports were being filed, characteristics that seemed similar. What did you find along the way in these investigations that led you, to sort of see any sort of patterns?
Well, one of the things that we did first on, Ian, was we looked and saw what researchers had done in the past and where they had been successful and maybe the procedures that they placed and they utilized. And one thing John Green did early on is he stated that he had used affidavits to accumulate reports. And we thought that this was a good way to force the witness to take their statement seriously, read it, make sure it's accurate before they put their signature on the paper and they swear under penalty of perjury that they're telling the truth. Every Bigfoot sighting report we take is signed under an affidavit. And since then, John's come out and said that he didn't use affidavits for all of his sighting reports, but he only used it for a few select ones. We use it for all of ours. And that helps us to ensure that we have an accurate statement. Now, from that point on, about how we interview people, essentially it's the same way you'd interview anybody on any relative incident, seeing how all the senses are affected by it, eye, nose, throat, hear,
right,
smell, etc. But you don't limit your questions. You want to leave it open-ended. So if there is something unusual that comes out of that, you want to get it, and you don't want to limit the witness to what they're saying. And so, just like Harvey was saying later on, by the time Harvey gets to somebody, they've already signed the affidavit. We've already interviewed them. We kind of know what we're going to get, but Harvey goes through the same process again, gets the witness comfortable with him,
right,
and then goes through his interview for the forensic part of it. But I think the most important thing is you keep it open-ended and you allow them to tell the story. Okay,
well, then that's what I'll pick out a little bit more here. But, I mean, when you're looking at a suspect, I imagine you would say, did he have a weapon? How were they dressed? What were their actions? Did you notice anything? And you as an investigator, if you're looking to find out whether or not you have the same suspect involved in a series of cases, you would find out, well, gosh, he used a coat hanger to jimmy every window. That's a similar characteristic. Are there any of those things that you see in the Bigfoot sightings that people are reporting that they're not necessarily trying to jibe with other reports, but they do because of their authenticity?
Sure. There are certain circumstances that bring forth similarities,
right,
namely that Bigfoot seems to have an affinity to being around people. Meaning that there are a lot of sightings around these Native American areas. And whether it's that the Native Americans respect them and won't hurt them, or it's decades and decades of being around them, knowing that their own behavior, how to mimic it, how to get food, how to do this or that. I'm not sure what it is, but there is a comfort level, and Harvey found that in Oklahoma. I found it in California and Minnesota. It seems to be a pretty consistent pattern that they're not afraid to be out.
Where were you in Minnesota? Can I ask, Dave?
Yeah, an area near Bena, B-E-N-A.
Very interesting. I'll have to find out more about that. Let's go ahead and get some callers, some questions. We'll go east of the Rockies first for Harvey Pratt and David Politis with Don in South Florida on Coast to Coast. Don? Don?
Yes.
Here's your chance.
Yes. Hello, Ian. It's a very good program you got. And
thank you.
Yes, hello, David and Harvey. Yeah, my question is, do you think that this could possibly be a spiritual type of an experience?
A spiritual experience?
I don't think
right.
so.
You know, I mean,
like an otherworldly kind of divine-like intervention, sort of?
Well, no, not exactly. My wife and I had a sighting, and we watched this creature for like 45 minutes, you know, from a elevated position. It wasn't aware that we were watching. And, you know, we didn't really have any idea what a Bigfoot was, you know, until after the fact. but just the things that happened and how it progressed, it almost seemed like more of a spiritual type of an experience.
All right. What do y'all think of that?
Can you extrapolate a little more on what made him think it was spiritual?
Well, I think the effect that it had on him and his wife, as opposed to like an angelic experience.
We've spoken to researchers, some pretty noted researchers that don't want their names told, that have stated that they've been in areas where they know that there were sightings, that strange things have happened to them. Sometimes they hear a buzzing sound, sometimes they see lights, sometimes they wake up and they've had some kind of strange feeling that they've never had before. Now that may be just dreaming. It may actually have something relative to the sighting. We don't know, but this thing leaves behind evidence similar to what a human would leave behind if they were in the area. There's feces, there's footprints, there's hair, there's evidence they've been there.
All right, very good, but not in the, people aren't responding to it in the sense that they feel like, oh my God, I just had a kind of spiritual encounter.
I would say that sometimes some people may say that because it's so unusual, and if it's a pleasant encounter, maybe they have that feeling. But Harvey may speak to that a little bit because of the Native American Association in Oklahoma.
Dave, you remember the people that we interviewed in southeast Oklahoma that said that they saw them walking among the deer, and he was petting it, and they just walked across the meadow. And then you also heard of that in Northern California, the same kind of experience, that there may have some kind of hypnotic capabilities, and that they possess some skills that we don't know about yet, you know. And I'm just repeating some things that I've been told, you know, that they mimic. They have great mimic capabilities of different animals, owls, and other creatures. And one of my questions I always ask is, did you see them with a tool? You know, were they using something? And I've heard some witnesses say that they carried a very large limb, and you see where they use limbs to knock, and they use them to click and to make noises. So there's, you know, there must be some, besides any kind of gibberish or language that they use, that they do communicate through great distances, and they make people think other things, you know, that there's somebody else. So I really think that they have some kind of abilities that we're not totally aware of.
How about that? All right, very good. Jim in Washington on Coast to Coast for Harvey Pratt and David Paulides.
Hi there. My question is kind of easy. It really is simple. That could it not be? You're saying that the Bigfoot, Sasquatch, etc., could be part of society, perhaps, or certainly at least within the Native American Indians. Could they also have gotten into one of our political systems at all?
Gentlemen, our political systems. Kara, first-time caller line in Arcadia, California on Coast to Coast.
Hi there. That's ARCATA, Arcata.
Arcata,
which is on the coast, right above Eureka. It's in the Redwoods, and we're just on the coast. Willow Creek is right over the hill, and then a few miles past that is Hoopa.
Arcata is in a beautiful spot there on the coast.
Yes, it is. So the thing of it is this. First of all, okay, I didn't really have a question, but I had a few statements I wanted to make quickly so you could get to other callers. But it's all I know, and I wanted to throw a few things in if that's okay.
Get it?
Go ahead. Just be quick.
Okay. Yeah, there are a couple papers here, as the gentleman probably know. One is the Eureka Times Standard, and one was, because they curtailed it, it's gone now, or it's the Eureka Reporter. And within the last few years, there was a big write-up about a family and or family with friends of people who started and kept going a big Bigfoot story that really was untrue for years and years and years and years. And then when the fellow passed on or was going to pass on, they corrected it. And that was a big thing in the newspaper. And I don't remember which one or what year. It wasn't that long ago. So you could look back in the backlogs of those and read that. That was interesting. A lot of stuff around here came out of that particular fib. Now, so you want to sort that one out for other things you may know about. Now, as far as this Indian devil, the words Indian devil, I've heard them intermixed with Indian witch and with certain people. Now, that might be two different things, but anyway, a story that I heard, and I think I heard it on educational TV around here, KEET, K-E-E-T, Channel 13. I think that might have been where I heard it. There were stories from people living in different areas, Indian people, that happened to be people that were participating in a diabetes clinic in our new Indian clinic here in Arcata. And one person was from up the way, up near Crescent City or Klamath or whatever, I think, or telling about being from up that way, and as a kid being told about, staying out of the water because the Indian devil would pull you in. And it was, I think, a female. And anyway, that was kind of a thing to keep the kids from going into the water and drowning.
Right.
Was talking about Indian devil. Now, let's see, what else? Hairy men all over the United States, white men are referred to as big hairy men, and sometimes as people with big feet. Let's see. I had another thing or two, but I can't remember it, so I'll leave it at that.
All right. Gentlemen, what about the white devil, the white witch? I haven't heard anything about that. What does that mean? The hairy devil?
I have no idea.
You hadn't heard that before either?
No.
Okay. I was trying to sort out exactly what she was talking about.
Well, I know that some Indian tribes refer to white men as hairy people or hairy men, refer to them as spiders.
Right.
So yeah, I've heard that.
Okay. All right, just checking. We'll get another one from California. It seems like almost all of our callers are coming from out that way. What's the percentage of Bigfoot stories from, say, California, the Pacific Rim of the United States, versus Oklahoma?
There's a lot of sightings that are coming out of Oklahoma, and that Texas, that region. It's once you get out into that area and you start to talk to people, there's a lot of people out there who just don't have internet access, don't know who to talk to. And then once you go in and go into the area and you speak from an educated level that you know something about the topic, I was out with Harvey 1 week, and it was absolutely amazing what we learned from that 1 week out there. Wouldn't you say, Harvey?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. The stories that I heard in Oregon and California about the Bigfoot participating in ceremonies and then backing off and staying in the mountains and coming down at those particular times and just watching and listening. Well, I heard the same stories here in Oklahoma, and I know that there's not a connection. It's not someone just repeating stories. I've heard those stories ever since I was a little boy. And I'm in the 60s, and I heard those stories a long time ago, and then I went up to northwest part of the United States and hear them again from people.
Do we tend to hear Bigfoot stories more from areas where there are a lot of rivers?
They are near water. That's one of the requirements that I think we've seen. And when you see a Bigfoot report come in, I always tell people go to Google Maps and see how far that sighting is from a river or a lake. And more times than not, it's within a couple miles.
I think we have time to get Jose in before the bottom of the hour. Jose?
Yeah.
You're talking with Harvey Pratt and David Politis, investigators with both with the North American Bigfoot Search and for research all across the country.
Thanks for taking my call. My question is, with all the investigating and all the talking with the natives, wouldn't the natives know where the Sasquatch or Bigfoot live if they are another tribe or another type of tribe?
Well, that's assuming that they are stationary. Harvey, David?
Harvey, go ahead and talk about Oklahoma.
Well, since I've been interviewing people and making drawings, I've kind of come to the conclusion that there are regions that the Native American people would not go into. So that's where this is ours. This is our part of the land, and that's theirs. And so we don't go over there. You know, they stay over there, we stay over here, and every now and then you'll get some drifting back and forth. But for the most part, there's a kind of a understanding. You know, we live here, you live over there, and I've caught that several times. Here in Oklahoma, there's certain areas that they would say, "Look, you don't want to go over there. You don't want to spend the night over there."
Right.
You know, it's scary. You don't want to go over there. That's where they are. So we stay over here.
What is the
California?
What is the scariest story you've ever heard associated with an actual, authentic Bigfoot sighting? Harvey or David?
Well, the one I heard one out of Utah with a young Indian man that I visited with, and his uncle was going out to challenge him, and this is fairly recently, and he just disappeared, and they had watched him in the mountains, and he rode into this area where they're not supposed to go. That's where Bigfoot lived. The hairy man lived there, and they were not to come into that. They don't go to that area. And he went into that area, and they found him seven days later, nude and covered with tree sap.
But still alive.
Still alive. And they brought him back into the camp, and they doctored him for another week, and he does not remember a great deal of what happened to him. So,
or doesn't try not to remember.
So to be covered in, and that's not the first time I've heard them say that if they were captured, that tree sap was put on their eyes so they couldn't see, and they were taken to different places. And this man was totally covered in tree sap, and this was a police officer that I had visited with. Okay,
so a police officer, and he had his eyes covered with tree sap, and as well as the rest of his body.
Uncle.
But
it was his uncle.
Okay.
That they went looking for to find him.
It's sort of like the classic mobster, or espionage novel where somebody has to be blindfolded before they're taken to the secret location of the big meeting. I love that. Harvey Pratt and David Politis, two investigators into Bigfoot, going into our last half hour. Look forward to hearing your questions, your comments, your own experiences, lining up the callers right now. And just like Harvey and David's investigation, the callers are now more representative of coming from all over the country. We'll get to your questions and comments coming up next. I encourage you to link up to Harvey and David at our webpage. Take a look at the new book, plus the forensic artwork that Harvey is responsible for. Find out more at coasttocoastam.com. And if you have Streamlink, go back and listen to that book on poisons last night, The Poisoner's Handbook. A great interview with Deborah Blum. Also interesting material and, kind of scary for our future with the number of poisons that are still out there lurking in our systems. Coast to Coast AM. It's all happening there on the website. This is Ian Punnett. Full boat of calls. We'll get to all of them coming up next for Harvey Pratt, who has done the great forensic artistry that's linked up on our webpage at coasttocoastam.com. And then David Politis, who is with the North American Bigfoot Search, and both of them with a police background, bringing a sort of a unique perspective to the investigation of Bigfoot. What about you and your experiences? We'll find out next, coming up on Coast to Coast. In for George Knapp tonight, this is Ian Punnett. Harvey and David taking your calls on Coast to Coast. Let's start with John in Oklahoma, east of the Rockies. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm having a little difficulty tonight taking these two guys seriously, because they're supposed to be in a history of police work, and yet at the same time they're not availing themselves of some of the simplest contemporary high-tech, like a stealth camera that utilizes infrared instead of flash-type photography. And for $125.25 with a 25% discount, they could get one of these cameras along with a 2 megabyte a memory card, all the batteries, and the shipping and everything for 40 of these cameras for $5,050. Now, that's not a lot of money, folks, to put into getting photographic evidence. You could actually cover 2 adjacent mountains, each with 15 cameras, and the pass in between with 10 cameras, all for 40 cameres for about $5,050.
Okay.
There's no excuse.
John. Let's have them respond. Go ahead. Nobody has to give any excuses to you. Go ahead, Harvey. David, what would be your response to John?
It's an easy response. What evidence do photographs have ever played in the Bigfoot world? The best piece of evidence, photographic, would be the Patterson-Gimlin film, and that's wrought with controversy. Do we believe that really was a Bigfoot in that film? Yes. But photo evidence really is going to play nothing towards the scientific community claiming that this is a species in and of itself.
That helps you track their movements on these 2 mountains, and from that point, you can actually move in and set up electronic or electrical traps like you would with a taser or something, and take one of them down and then bring it in alive.
Well, John, that might be the way you do it, but it doesn't mean necessarily that that's the only way to do this. In fact, if you go to the wait, I'm going to finish. John, I'm going to finish that thought with you or without you. I will finish that thought. If you go on our webpage tonight, coasttocoastam.com, there's a story in the news section of a photograph that is appearing on the web. Have you seen it, Harvey and David?
Yes.
Okay, so it's supposedly of a Bigfoot head sticking up through the brush. And John, this would be some of the photographic proof that you are seeking. I think it looks totally bogus. It looks like a kid's Halloween costume, but that's just me.
Evidence, is it?
If it is, is that tantamount to evidence? Harvey, David, your thought on that photograph that's on the webpage tonight?
Well, Ian, let me respond. First off, I'm not a researcher. I don't go out and try to track these down. I'm a police forensic artist. I interview people. I'm not out. I don't have the time to go out and search around. So I have another job.
And Ian, towards that end, we have never gone out and tried to track one down. I mean,
but why not?
This has been going on for 50 years. There's probably 25 other groups out there that are doing this every weekend. Have they ever been successful? No. Do I think that they're going to be successful in the future? No. So why
not?
Why not? Well, if you go all the way back to the 1920s, in this article I talked about where the 3 Native American groups came out, and Harvey alluded to it several times, is these things have some special abilities that don't even come close to what humans can do. They can run extremely fast. They can mimic things in the bush. They have the ability to be stealthy, whether that's to stand behind a tree and not be seen, mold themselves into the ground and lay there. We're not sure, but they have some abilities about escaping and getting away that we can't keep up.
Okay. Let me get to Susan, who's waiting in North Georgia on Coast to Coast. Hey, Susan, where in North Georgia are you?
Hi, Ian. I live in a small town called Talking Rock.
Okay. I've been up in North Georgia many times. Lovely up there.
Yes. I came in late to your program, and I thought I heard something about the hair color in that when they're younger, their hair color is light. Did I hear that correctly?
Well, it could be. We were speculating about that because there seemed to be some disparity in the hair color testimony. And so we're just wondering whether, just like in humans, who might start off with lighter hair and then end up going darker as they got older, the same could be true of Bigfoot.
Well, my son had an experience driving. There's a large cove near where we live, and this was late at night. He was driving with a friend of his and passed by these 2 creatures, and they were smaller than what you would think a Bigfoot would be, and the hair color was really light, and they were crouched down eating some sort of, like, he thought maybe roadkill. But when they were driving by, one of them looked directly at my son, and it just totally freaked him out. He said this had a face like a human, but it was clearly an animal. They were both animals. They were both the same, about in height and color. And I said, well, I'd never heard of a light-haired Bigfoot, but it intrigued me when I heard you tonight.
Harvey, David, who wants to go here with Susan?
That's a very consistent statement from someone who probably hasn't been in the field a lot, but in each one of the witnesses that we interviewed that had seen something very similar to your caller, the people were very apprehensive to admit what color they had, because that isn't a color that's talked about by other researchers and expounded about in the Bigfoot community very much at all.
But that would be consistent with the idea that Susan's adolescents had seen an adolescent Bigfoot.
Correct.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you. Like that sort of independent corroboration of something we had mentioned earlier. David's on a first-time caller line in L.A. for David Politis and Harvey Pratt.
Hey there. I just I had a little comment about the little Bigfoots that the woman earlier mentioned, and a little story of mine and my experience with them. My grandmother was half Pima Indian from Arizona, and so growing up with that culture, I went to a youth camp when I was about in sixth grade in Bishop, California. The camp director was a Paiute man, and it was, like the woman said earlier, there's a lot of Paiutes in that area, and they see a lot of Bigfoots. My father was also working for the camp, so him and we took a little walk behind the camp. We crossed a small river, and we took a back walkway, just to go get some air and hang out. And we started noticing footprints, and they looked, like a large, wide foot, not quite a grown-up Bigfoot, but what we were referring to as little Bigfoots. And actually listening tonight was the first time hearing about that. So we saw these tracks. We mentioned it to the camp director. We mentioned it to a few people. They kind of were hush-hush about it. They didn't want to talk about it too much. And there was actually a camera crew there that was working for the camp, and my dad got them to, document it and record it, and they interviewed him, and he talked about it. And also in that back area, we had found a cow that looked like it had been eaten. I wasn't sure if it was natural causes or possibly there was other Bigfoots there, and maybe there was some sort of confrontation with this cow. But my dad talked to the camp director, and he told them, hey, you can't mention anything about this to the camp, but I'll always introduce you to my mother, who's a Paiute woman, and she said that that she confirmed that there was Bigfoots in that area, and that they knew about them, and that they used to actually have to lock their trash cans at night because the Bigfoots at times would come into town and try to take food out of the trash cans.
Harvey, David?
Very consistent story.
That trash can searching story? I don't think I've ever heard that before.
I was actually driving through the mountains between Hoopa and the coast one day on a dirt road, and there was a woman riding her horse. And I stopped alongside of her, and I had a giant metal decal on the side of my car indicating where I worked. And we had a conversation. I said, so have you ever heard any stories about Bigfoot up here? And she related a story to me about in the middle of the night, their garbage can disappeared from their home, which was extremely rural. And she said that days later, they found some garbage on a hillside trail 2 miles away. And they said that garbage can must have weighed 60 or 70 pounds, and they couldn't understand how it got to where it was.
Now, wouldn't be consistent with a bear dragging it off?
No, I don't think a bear could drag off a garbage can that big. She said there was no way. A bear would go through it and make a mess and throw the garbage around, but they wouldn't carry the can away.
No. Actually, I get a lot of deer in my neighborhood because I live not far from the Mississippi, and it is we get a lot of these rather large bucks that go through garbage, and whether it's bucks or whether it's fox or whether it's any of the other wildlife in the area, nobody ever carries it away. They just tip it over, stomp around in it, go searching around. Let's get to Lewis in Porter, Texas, on Coast to Coast for Harvey Pratt and David Politis, Bigfoot researchers. Lewis?
How y'all doing?
Go ahead, Lewis.
I'm a very avid outdoorsman and an avid hunter for 30 years. And 2007, I saw something on a large piece of land that we lease on the San Jacinto River in Montgomery County, Texas. It was a brief sighting. I say brief, it seemed like a lifetime. It lasted probably 3, maybe 4 minutes. But this was an animal, a large animal that walked on its hind legs. I got a real good view of it and watched it for a couple minutes. And my concern is, are they dangerous?
Okay. Harvey, David, any reason for Lewis to be scared?
Well, if we go back to the belief system that on that genetic scale they're closer to human than anything else, well, humans have aberrant behavior, and some people have called some humans monsters, and there have been people that have done serial killings like Ted Bundy. And so to think that something on that genetic scale that's close to human would be entirely pure, I don't think would be a consistent, rational thought. So I would say that you have to be careful, and I think that there's probably, just listening to the Native Americans' tales about being kidnapped, abducted, some of them cannibalized, I think there's some reason to be very cautious.
David, earlier I mentioned to Harvey, I asked him what the scariest story he'd ever heard about a Bigfoot. I don't think I heard one from you. Have you ever heard an encounter where somebody said, it was the most terrifying moment of my life, and here's why?
There's one of the pictures on your website is a facial sketch that Harvey did of an incident that happened in Hoopa, and I don't know that the woman actually said it was very scary, but it was very real, and she lived on the fringe of the reservation. She was the last house before she went up into the mountains. She heard some rustling in a garbage can on the side of her house, and the motion light went on. She grabbed her cell phone because she knew there were a lot of big bears out there. She went out and she looked over, and she saw this thing leaning over the side of this tin shed going through her garbage. And she said it looked up at her, and she got a great facial look in the light, and then it went back to going through the garbage, and it didn't even care. She called her brother-in-law, who was an on-duty police officer in the area, and they responded 2 officers. The story's in the Hoopa Project. Harvey did the sketch. It's an amazing story with a great sketch as the biped walked into the woods, and you can see the muscle definition in the back, and there's that profile picture that's on your side of it. And it's a very mature, very big, very large and heavy. And I interviewed one of the police officers that was there, and he stated to me that when he went into the woods, following the path just after it walked in, it was one of the scariest moments in his life as well.
West of the Rockies, Pete is in eastern Oregon on Coast to Coast for Harvey Pratt and David Paulides. Pete?
Good morning. I'm 75 years old, and I've lived in this area for a good many years, and I've had a number of friends that have had sightings. And 2 of them have, 3 of them have books that have been quite recently written. I don't happen to have a copy right here, but James Hinchcliffe had a sighting on Weston Mountain just before snow this last fall, and that was his second one. He had one when he was about 12 years old. And I think he has access to the books. He lives up James Hinchcliffe. And then we got Patricia Patterson and Bob Gimlin. And Patty's never seen one, but her husband, of course, is dead now.
Right.
But by contacting either one of those, they can get you in touch with someone that can supply the book that'll pretty well tell the whole story.
Gentlemen? Harvey or David on that?
No comment.
Okay. Thank you. Let me get to Ruth in Virginia as we're winding down on time with Harvey Pratt and David Paulides. Ruth?
Hi. It's nice to hear from you. I had a sighting back in 1964. I was 18, getting ready to go to Yukon, and I was riding my horse. He was a hunter. He was almost 6 feet at the shoulders. We were going up by the Stanford Reservoir through private land that was 300 acres, and we went up on the side of a hill, and my horse was really, really nervous, and all of a sudden it stood up behind me, to the left, behind some bushes, in one fluid motion. It was incredible. He was taller than my horse, and me sitting on the horse. So my torso must have been about 2.5 feet. And I got a really clear look at him. He was about 12 feet away. He had short hair. He didn't look as big as the Bigfoot in the Patterson film. He was more narrow, more slender. He looked like a man with about 1.5 inch pelt coat, black, solid black. His skin was black. His eyes were really dark. His face did not look like an ape's face. The shape of it was more rectangular, and it was kind of domed, but his nose was more like just an average person's, kind of like, but pushed in a little bit. And he looked more curious than anything. Now, I did notice that his fists were bald, and if he had wanted to hurt me and the horse, I mean, my horse was freaking out, he could have just one step forward and punched the horse, and the horse would have fallen over sideways off the hill. I mean, he could have gotten both of us. And he didn't. I know he was human or very close to human, and that's why I don't believe in shooting them or hunting them.
Sure. What did happen? Did he run away?
No, he just stood up there. My horse and I freaked out. I held my horse as long as I could to get a look at this thing, and then we just took off. And by the time we got back to the stable, which was several miles away, we were just covered in lather. But
right.
That was, like I said, 46 years ago, and it was much more rural there.
And you remember it like it was yesterday?
Oh, I'll never forget it. Yeah.
Was that in Utah?
No, it was in Stamford, Connecticut, near the Stamford Reservoir, and I've never heard of any other Bigfoot sightings in Connecticut.
What month was it?
In August. It was just before I went away to school, Yukon. I mean, the thing was, the horse saw it. I mean, the horse was freaking too. I mean, he was almost uncontrollable. It was everything I could do to stand up, to sit on him. But this entity, this being, stood up, and he was taller than my horse, which is 6 feet at the shoulders, and my torso, taller than my head, and he was about 12 feet away. And like I said, his fists were bald.
That's I think what you need to.
I was more curious. It's like
right. Well, you know what? That brings us right back to where we started, Ruth, which is back to the drawings on the webpage, which I would say reflect that kind of curiosity, don't you think, Harvey and David? That sort of human-like, almost an imploring look in one of those pictures.
Right.
Yes.
So thank you so much. Enjoyed it quite a bit. Good luck on the book. Link up to both Harvey and David, if you can, through coasttocoastam.com. And I look forward to hearing more about the evidence that exists when that hair gets tested. I know George Knapp will be back in time next time with overcoming whatever technical difficulties to make sure he's there for that announcement. In the meantime, thank you so much for your time. And for everybody on the show tonight, go back and catch it from the beginning on Streamlink. Deus te amat. And I